Good morning. It's March 30th, 2022. This is To My Liberal Friends, and I'm John Haddo. The Biden budget is out, and once again it shows a massive amount of spending. It actually increases defense spending, but that will be overwhelmed by inflation, so it's actually a net decrease. But the big key point in the tax world is Biden's attempt to introduce a wealth tax to the United States. Basically, he wants to tax unrealized gains, which is a ludicrous suggestion because it's difficult to administer and hard to enforce. But let's talk about what a wealth tax is. 12 European countries had a wealth tax in 1990, and that's according to OECD. But now the number stands at 4. Spain, Switzerland, Norway, and it will include Belgium because they just introduced a very limited version of its own. All of these countries that ditched it found out it didn't work. And most economists agree that they were poorly designed and poorly implemented. And in the case of France, the government lost twice as much revenue as it ultimately yielded by the tax. People just moved away or didn't pay the tax. For progressives, it is the holy grail to tax people that have money so they can give money to those that don't. But not all Democrats look at that way. There are actually some logical people. Larry Summers, former Secretary of the Treasury in a Democratic administration, and I will quote, "For progressives to invest their energy in a proposal that the Supreme Court has better than a 50% chance of declaring unconstitutional, that has very little chance of passing through the Congress, whose revenue potential is extraordinarily in doubt, it seems to me potentially sacrificing an immense opportunity," end quote. So Larry Summers, he gets it. He understands it doesn't work. But what is causing some of these big problems for the American public? It's inflation. That's the number one issue in everybody's mind. Well, what is inflation? Simply put, inflation is the broad rise in prices and fall in the value of money. As economist Milton Friedman stated, quote, "Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomena. It's not a fiscal phenomena. It can be reduced only by more and rapid increase in the quantity of money than in output," end quote. The current bout of inflation stems from massive government spending. In 2020 and 2021, the government spent the equivalent of 27% of GDP on COVID relief and stimulus. That's the second largest fiscal response as a percentage of GDP of any industrialized nation. And this spending was largely paid for by newly created money from the Federal Reserve. In just 21 months, from February 2020 to November 21, the money supply increased by the same amount it did in the nearly 10-year period preceding it. In other words, in less than 2 years, we matched what we'd done in 10 years. Trillions in government spending resulted in an economy bloated with cheap money. And due to the dramatic spending and countless downstream effects of the reactions to the pandemic, solutions to inflation, they're not quick, they're not straightforward, and they're not easy. We've seen in recent weeks the Fed announced they expect to rise interest rates 3 to 5 times in 2022 to cool inflation. Yet with an economy propped up and addicted to cheap money, doing so could deal a heavy blow to the economy overall. It could drive us into a recession, and the massive national debt will become more expensive to services with higher interest rates. Unfortunately for us, leaders in the White House have offered bogus solutions, often scapegoating an undeserving third party. Throughout the end of last year, Biden claimed the Build Back Better Act would ease inflation by making life less expensive for working people at zero cost. How spending trillions more in newly created dollars would actually fight inflation boggles my mind, and he certainly had no explanation. Another fanciful solution in the White House offers to utilize antitrust to disarm big companies, and they were big long before inflation, that are supposedly responsible for price spikes. We see Jen Psaki in the White House blame companies for everything. The Biden even blames port delays and supply chain crisis as an inflation driver. While these supply chain issues, they harm an already weak supply, they're not the reason for inflation. They're not the cause at all. That inflation is a sustained rise in prices overall, not just in specific sectors. These strategies the Biden administrations have nothing to do with curbing inflation, just driving their agenda. Wealth tax is a bad idea. We know it. Biden should know it, but still he puts it forward because he has to show fealty to the progressive agenda. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening.